Hi, everyone. Again, this is Katrina Dizon Mariategue, and I'm the Immigration Policy Manager of SEARAC, the Southeast Asia Resource Action Center. And I'm honored today to be moderating the call with support from Suvan, who you met earlier, our policy associate, who is going to be offering technical assistance for today's call. We are also going to be joined by our colleagues at the National Immigration Law Center, or NILC. We have Angelo Mathai, the Senior Research Associate, and Jenny Rajeski, the Health Policy Analyst. NILC has been leading efforts to provide the community with information and updates on the President's recent executive orders. So on behalf of SEARAC and our partners at NILC, we thank you all for joining today's call to discuss these executive orders and analyze their potential impacts on the Southeast Asian American community. In less than a month since taking office, the President has signed a sweeping number of executive orders that have taken crucial steps to expand deportation, discriminate against immigrants based on religion, turn away vulnerable refugees, expand mass incarceration in terrorized communities. And it doesn't stop there. Immigrant activists are bracing for additional orders that will not only keep immigrants out, but demonize them and inflict pain on their families and loved ones. The way that this administration has continued to aggressively attack the rights and civil liberties of communities throughout the country is unprecedented, and we at SEARAC remain committed to working with the community to mobilize and resist these attacks. The objective of today's webinar is to provide information on recently signed and leaked executive orders, provide analysis on how they may impact Southeast Asian Americans, share how they are influencing congressional action, and provide a space to share resources and begin a coordinated dialogue aimed at mobilization. With that, I'd like to introduce everyone to our first speaker. Angelo Mathai is currently the Senior Research Associate at NILC, where he provides research and policy analysis in support of various teams within the organization. Previously, he worked for the Pew Charitable Trust, Immigration and the States Project, where he conducted research and developed strategy related to the intersection of federal, state, and local immigration laws and the potential impact on all levels of government. Prior to that, he worked with the Migration Policy Institute's National Center on Immigrant Integration Policy. Angelo will be providing an overview on the executive orders signed by the Trump administration on interior enforcement and also the refugee ban. Angelo?
Hi, everyone, and thank you, SEARAC, for inviting NILC to join this call. First, I wanted to provide an overview and a brief timeline of the Muslim ban executive order and update all of you on what may be coming down the pipeline. On January 27, 2017, President Trump signed an executive order titled Protecting the Nation from Foreign Terrorist Entry into the United States, suspending the entire U.S. refugee admissions program for at least 120 days, indefinitely banning Syrian refugees, and banning individuals from 7 Muslim-majority countries. However, on February 3rd, a judge issued a nationwide temporary restraining order blocking multiple parts of the executive order and reinstating traveling visas that were previously canceled. On February 9th, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals issued a decision denying the Trump administration's request that the court lift a temporary restraining order which requires that the government not enforce most of the executive order's provisions. The Ninth Circuit's decision converts the temporary restraining order to a preliminary injunction, which essentially means that the freeze on implementing certain parts of the executive order will remain indefinitely unless the Ninth Circuit decision is overturned on appeal. As Katrina noted earlier, we are expecting a new version of this travel ban sometime this week. So a lot of what I provided in this timeline may essentially change, given that there might be a second version of the Muslim ban, which will likely be attacked or litigated against as well. That is essentially what we are assuming. So I think we should just all stay tuned for whatever comes down the pipeline this week. Next slide, please. So in addition to the Muslim ban, President Trump also signed another executive order calling for major changes to interior enforcement. Some of the key elements of the executive order include expanding immigration and customs enforcement priorities, making them so broad that in effect the executive order eliminates any notion of actual prioritization. The executive order also directs the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security to hire 10,000 new ICE officers to the degree that the law and appropriation of funds by Congress makes this possible. Further, the executive order jeopardizes due process and other constitutional protections that all people have regardless of their immigration status by encouraging the use of racial profiling by ICE and local law enforcement officials. It also threatens to punish localities by placing limits on how much they will assist with federal immigration enforcement actions. The intended effect of this component of the executive order seems to be to coerce localities into reversing their sanctuary policies by threatening them with a loss of federal funding and other penalties. Overall, the executive order that President Trump signed on January 25th could, depending on how it's interpreted and implemented, dramatically change how immigration laws are enforced in the interior of the U.S. Lastly, I should note that this past weekend, the Trump administration released implementation guidelines that discuss the type of enforcement actions that will likely occur, such as the hiring of the 10,000 new immigrant and customs agents and expanding the number of detention facilities. Several organizations, including NILC, are still studying these memos and are evaluating its effect. Next slide.
Thank you, Angelo, for providing us with that summary of information. So I hope folks found that helpful. If you do have questions for Angelo, please save them towards the end of the call. We're going to be doing a brief question and answer with him as well as Jenny. So now we want to focus a little bit on how these executive orders uniquely and specifically impact the Southeast Asian American community. The messaging around the deportation of felons, not families, was initially used by President Obama, but is now being used by this administration and elevated in much more terrifying ways. His mandate to prioritize the deportation of those with any criminal record, including those that have not even been formally charged, is very terrifying for many Southeast Asian Americans who have already served their time and have a track record of rehabilitation. Second, this executive order suspends ICE use of a term we call prosecutorial discretion, which is a tool to evaluate if an individual is a threat to their community prior to deporting them. In the past, SEARAC and advocates of those with old criminal records have used prosecutorial discretion as a tool to argue the release of individuals who demonstrate that they have turned their lives around and have become assets to their communities. It has been a very crucial advocacy tool and the only line of defense we have had due to constraints of current immigration laws. This executive order destroys much of the leverage we have had in the past to negotiate for the release of many community members. Third, we're also incredibly worried about what these orders could mean for the future of repatriation agreements, which dictate if and how many deportees will be accepted by Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. There is nothing much to stop this president from mandating that DHS and the State Department pursue the renegotiation of these agreements to force Cambodia to accept more deportees and strong-arm Vietnam and Laos to begin accepting refugees. Lastly, these executive orders are a blatant attack on America's refugee resettlement system, a legacy that was created in response to the humanitarian need following the Vietnam War, which resettled 1 million Southeast Asians from Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam over 40 years ago. So what are we seeing as an immediate impact of these executive orders on deportation? In the past 2 weeks, there have been ICE raids conducted and heightened removal efforts in over 6 states across the country, including North Carolina, Texas, Minnesota, New York, and California. Among those detained are a 23-year-old man with deferred action for childhood arrival status in Seattle, Washington, a victim of domestic violence in El Paso, Texas, and a Cambodian man with a 30-year-old conviction, one he had committed as a minor, and had no prior order of removal, who was detained in his home in North Carolina. Even more alarming is the fact that ICE has been reported to pick people up from the most vulnerable of places, their homes, at courthouses, places of worship, and other areas that should be sanctuaries. From these activities, it is clear that anyone and everyone is a target for ICE, regardless of community contributions, family ties, rehabilitation, and refugee status. Many immigration activists in cities such as Austin and Los Angeles have feared that these recent raids have been ordered in retaliation for these cities who have sanctuary city policies. According to a Reuters news article, a government aide familiar with these raids said it's possible that these daytime operations is very different from the Obama administration's nighttime raids, which is meant to send a message to the community that the Trump deportation force is now in effect. The impact is nothing short of terrifying, especially for the Southeast Asian American community. In the past few weeks, we have heard word that travel documents have recently been issued to over 30 Cambodian community members across the country. These individuals will be removed starting next month and on into April. So with that, I wanted to take a brief poll from folks on the phone to really get a gauge of how this really impacts Southeast Asian Americans everywhere. For folks that are comfortable in sharing, I'd like to know, do you know anyone directly impacted by the recent raids or deportation efforts? And if you can share, that would be great. And we'll share the results as well.
We'll give folks about a minute.
We'll give folks about a minute to put their answers in. Great, thank you everybody for sharing. So we're going to pull up the results on the screen. So as you guys can see, we have about a good chunk of folks that have family members and community members directly impacted, almost half of those on the call, and about 20% of individuals that are still trying to gather more information. So it really is definitely a very uncertain and very scary time indeed. So now we want to move on to discuss 3 executive orders under the Trump administration signed around criminal justice following his interior enforcement initiatives. These orders have not received as much attention as the prior 2, and although its impacts may be less immediate, it's still important to understand how it could shape the landscape of incarceration and deportation in the future. Essentially, these 3 executive orders are aimed at ramping up law enforcement efforts to reduce crime by pushing key agencies to participate in working groups and task forces to advise the president on how to reduce criminal activity, including illegal immigration, as well as provide recommendations aimed at the tougher prosecution of crimes against law enforcement. The Trump administration has repeatedly tried to stoke fear in Americans by claiming that violent crimes has been on the rise, when in reality, crime in the United States has been at an all-time low, decreasing gradually in the last 44 years. These orders undermine prior bipartisan sentencing reform efforts to address mass incarceration, scapegoat immigrants and communities of color under the false pretense of public safety, and further deteriorates trust between local communities and law enforcement. While these orders do not implement any specific policies to fuel mass incarceration directly, it sets the stage for congressional action by painting a terrifying narrative against immigrants and people of color. It's important for Southeast Asian Americans to speak out against any forms of enforcement-only approaches to both detention and deportation, because both are so inextricably linked together. Most community members with deportation orders have acquired them due to old criminal convictions. Due to their unique refugee status, Southeast Asian Americans are disproportionately impacted by poverty, and the youth are often prone to higher than average arrest and incarceration rates. Southeast Asian Americans play a unique role and bring a unique perspective on how to ultimately dismantle the school to prison to deportation pipeline through advocacy. With that, I'd like to take another quick poll to gauge again the impact on the community. If you're comfortable with sharing, I'd like to invite participants to share, do you know anyone who is currently or formerly incarcerated? And we'll give folks another 60 seconds to put in their answers, and then we'll share out the results.
Yep.
Right, last 5 seconds, and then we'll share the results on the screen. So thank you to everyone that participated. Wow, so as folks can see, a majority of folks on the call know of someone that is currently or formerly incarcerated, which again is a huge testament to why our community really needs to be speaking out against these policies that will be detrimental to expanding mass incarceration throughout the country. So with that, I would like to introduce everybody now to our next speaker. After reviewing a number of executive orders that have been signed by the administration, we're going to be now discussing a leaked executive order that could greatly impact Southeast Asian Americans everywhere. So our next speaker is Jenny Brzezinski, who leads the National Immigration Law Center's team working to defend, protect, and improve low-income immigrants' access to affordable health care. NILC works in partnership with national policy and advocacy groups, community-based organizations, healthcare providers, legal and social service agencies, and government officials. Prior to joining NILC, Jenny directed the health advocacy program at the New York Immigration Coalition. She started her health-related career working at community health centers in New York and Estes Park, Colorado. So Jenny?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So you could go to the next slide. All right. So what I'm going to talk about today is an executive order that was drafted and leaked by Vox on January 25th. It's called, but it hasn't been signed yet, it's called Protecting Taxpayer Resources by Ensuring Our Immigration Laws Promoted Accountability and Responsibility. And again, it was part of this slew of signed and also unsigned and leaked executive orders on immigration. This one covers several major issues affecting immigrants' access to health programs, public benefits, and economic supports. Its reach and its scope is exceedingly broad and would reverse decades of policy and guidance. The proposals in this executive order or leaked executive order do raise serious legal questions, but it also raises just a lot of questions because most of what it's proposing to do is they're saying that they would like rescind and release new policy guidance or require new rulemaking, so notice and comment and formal rulemaking to implement. So a lot of questions about how this would actually be implemented, but I think learning from the other executive orders, I think we can expect the worst here if this were to be signed and implemented. So it, like all of the others, is meant to stoke fear in immigrant communities. This one actually happens to be directed and affect mostly documented immigrants, including green card holders, as well as lawfully present people who are applying for their green cards, especially those who are petitioned by family members, and the U.S. citizen kids in mixed immigration status families whose parents would be deterred from applying for health coverage for their kids or other programs for their kids, food assistance for their kids, or even using basic health services. So with this executive order, low-income immigrants are certainly the main targets, and I think the impact is already being felt. It's definitely already being felt. People are already avoiding using health and other benefits that they or their children are eligible for. It would also have an effect of putting the brakes on family-based legal immigration of low-income immigrants. So this public charge it's based on the myth that immigrants use benefits at higher rates than native citizens, which has been substantiated by reports by anti-immigrant think tanks that use misleading data and also conflate use of benefits by U.S. citizen kids and mixed status families with benefits used by immigrants themselves. To go through some of the provisions that are in here, it may expand restrictions of some of the immigrant eligibility restrictions for public benefit programs. It might add the 5-year bar for certain immigrants to be eligible for programs that right now don't have a 5-year bar. It changes guidance around how public charge determinations are made. So public charge is a test conducted by immigration officials at an immigrant's green card interview or when they're entering the country on an immigrant visa or applying for an immigrant visa. And the public charge test seeks to determine if someone, based on their totality of circumstances, their health, their age, their ability to work, their skills, their income, their assets, their sponsor, if they would be now or in the future dependent on the government for their subsistence. And there's been very clear guidance for the last 20 years on which types of public benefit programs would be a problem or would be considered in the public charge determination. And what this executive order would do is completely change that guidance. Previously, that guidance has said only cash assistance, use of cash benefits like TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or SSI, would be used in the determination of the public charge determination, but not any other kind of public benefit like Medicaid or food stamps or child care or housing assistance or anything else. And what this proposes to do is say that an immigrant's use of any kind of means-tested benefit, so any benefit for which income is a factor or consideration, could be used in the public charge determination. So this would make it much harder for people to get green cards or to get visas to enter the country, and has already chilled use of those programs by people who are eligible for them right now. It also puts the fear of deportation in people who use these benefits after they get their green cards and become LPRs. Another thing that the executive order would do is to seek reimbursement from an immigrant sponsor if a sponsored immigrant uses a federal means-tested public benefit. And that would redefine what benefits are included in that definition. And so it would deter the use of benefits and programs by sponsored immigrants, of course, as well as deterring just sponsorship in general and legal immigration. It also would require a Social Security number from parents as well as children and families who are applying for the child tax credit. So it would prevent families who right now have access to the child tax credit if their parents do not have Social Security numbers or file taxes with an ITIN, even if the kids are U.S. citizens and have Social Security numbers. And then the other thing that it would do is it wouldn't allow people to get credit for their contributions to Social Security if they worked without authorization. So when people are eventually able to get a Social Security number and attempt to get credit for all the contributions they made to Social Security when they worked, when they were unauthorized, this would not allow people to get that credit. So it means that their Social Security payments when they retire would be much lower, and be a huge, it's basically robbing from people who have, taking money from people who have been contributing to Social Security with their employment, with their work. So it's breathtaking in its scope here. We've already heard of people who have been wanting to disenroll from Medicaid or other benefit programs, even though it hasn't been signed yet. And there have been just a lot of activity and interest in this issue, and efforts to push back on this right now, even to try to stop it from being signed. We really don't have any intel on when or if this would be signed. We're operating on the assumption that it will be, or that it may be just implemented over time without a signed executive order, just through administrative action. So we are definitely tracking this, and will provide providing updates and information to folks who want to be involved. We've set up we have a listserv if people are interested in joining to get more information, or as more information becomes available. We're also planning for a long-term strategy to fight this if it is signed. So we've also set up an email address, publiccharge@nilc.org, where people can send stories of impact that's happening already, or requests to stay informed, or questions that people have about this executive order, or requests to be added to our listserv can be sent to that email address. We are definitely documenting stories of impact and are sharing those with elected officials already. If it is signed, we will have an analysis and an FAQ available as soon as possible, and would send that out and make it available on our website. We also have a statement, kind of a press statement that's ready to go if it is signed, and it's a sign-on, so organizations can sign on to this statement, and I'd be happy to share that link as well for folks or organizations to sign on to that statement. And I guess just the last thing that I would say is that we are also doing a lot of legal analysis on at least the information that we have in the leaked executive order already. And as I said, there are a lot of it raises legal concerns. So if your organizations are interested in kind of the legal fight, feel free to be in touch with me, and I can connect you with our lawyers here who are organizing the legal response.
Great, thank you so much. So for folks that are interested, I'll be sending out a link to that NILC sign-on letter tomorrow as a follow-up to the webinar. And if folks have any questions for Jenny, definitely, you can actually start typing in your questions, and we'll definitely be getting to those questions at the end of the webinar. So thanks again, Jenny, for walking us through that very potentially terrifying executive order. Folks on the call may be wondering why Southeast Asian Americans should care about this executive order, even if it hasn't been signed yet. Public benefits that are critical for low-income families are actually under constant attack, not just in this draft executive order, but also in Congress. Knowing what the impact will be on Southeast Asian American communities is important, so that we are prepared to fight to the best of our abilities. The rate of poverty in Asian American communities often masks huge disparities among ethnic groups, largely due to the model minority myth. There's also an assumption that Southeast Asian Americans no longer access public benefits and thus are not affected by attacks on these resources. So this data that you can see on your screen, it was actually shared with us by Helly Lee, a former SEARAC staffer and a partner. And this data reflects 2011 to 2013 census data, which maps the proportion of households under each group, which rely on a number of income sources, including supplemental security income, cash public assistance, and food stamps or SNAP benefits. As you can see, compared to the average Asian American household, Southeast Asian Americans still very much rely on these resources. An attack on public benefits for immigrants could potentially harm a huge number of Southeast Asian Americans, regardless of immigration status, especially for families in mixed status households. The signing of this executive order also potentially impacts the future of refugee resettlement in the country, as refugees are often the biggest beneficiaries of public benefits. Again, just to echo what Jenny mentioned earlier, this executive order has not yet been signed, but we will be sure to monitor and keep everyone posted as we get updates. It's really our hope that the administration recognizes the mass protests, strikes, and marches and rallies across the country in support of immigrants enough that this executive order never sees the light of day. So lastly, we thought it was also important to have a quick discussion to really understand the power that these executive orders truly have and what their role is in relationship to legislation. Executive orders alone can mandate immediate action from government, but in order to have real impact in the long term, they still need help from Congress to ensure that adequate laws and funding are enacted to support their objectives. Right now, these initiatives serve as a sort of a PR strategy to set the stage and momentum for congressional action. Thus, if our congressional leaders don't hear from us, there's not much to stop them from introducing and passing legislation, and once signed into law, these efforts will be much harder to stop. So just to give folks a brief example, just this month, Senator Cotton from Arkansas introduced the RAISE Act, a bill that would curb not illegal but legal immigration. Its aim is really to cut immigration by 50% in 10 years and cut the ability to sponsor family members for green cards. And as many on the call know, Asian Americans rely heavily on this country's family visa sponsorship system. For example, Vietnam ranked as the 4th country with the greatest number of visa backlogs. In 2012, almost half of the 27,000 immigrants from Vietnam came as siblings or adult children of U.S. citizens. This bill would cripple legal immigration and family reunification from Vietnam as well as other Asian countries. Additionally, this bill also promised to eliminate diversity visa lottery and cut refugee admissions to 50,000, basically in line with the language of President Trump's executive order. So as you can see, the Republican administration is really working in coordination with our Republican-controlled Congress. This bill will be just the first of many others in the coming months. So please continue to reach out to your elected officials, particularly if you live in Republican districts. Now more than ever is the time for them to hear from you. So I know there was a lot of information shared today on numerous signed and potential executive orders. So just to summarize everything we discussed, the immediate threats at present will come from the administration's increase in deportation efforts, as we have witnessed this past week with the mass raids across the country, essentially targeting everyone, including the undocumented and those with criminal convictions. In addition, the administration's new tough on crime agenda impacts both our immigration and detention systems, and we must continue to fight back against it. Thanks to the Ninth Circuit Court ruling, the refugee and Muslim ban are on hold for the moment, but we will continue to monitor its progress as the administration has been vocal about finding other ways to get around this ruling. And we'll also keep folks posted as we get more information about a new executive order that the administration has promised to release this week. Lastly, the public charge executive order, or the income test for immigrants and refugees, are potential threats as of the moment, as nothing yet has been signed. However, advocates have been hearing reports of immigrants already afraid to access their benefits for fear of retribution. So as difficult it may be, we ask that individuals not to panic, but please remain vigilant and keep up to date on the latest news on this particular executive order. Given all that information, we'd love to hear again from participants, just for SEARAC's future reference. We have a poll question, and if folks could kind of weigh in. What executive order are you most concerned with, or would you like the most updates on in the future? Interior enforcement, or the border wall, refugee ban, criminal justice, or the public charge executive order? So again, we'll give folks another maybe 60 seconds to put in their answers, and then we'll share the results. So thanks everyone for putting in your answers. We'll share the results on the screen. Wow, okay, yeah, so definitely folks are definitely interested in the public charge executive order the most, followed by criminal justice, refugee ban, and interior enforcement. So yeah, we'll be working very closely with our partners at NILC, and we'll make sure that any analysis or any updates that is shared as a result of the executive order is signed with the community. So now we want to share and talk about things that you can do in your own communities. It's really important to understand that despite all of these terrible actions across the country, you really still have the power to do something. And here's a list of a few things that you can do. So we encourage folks to report and document raids and arrests. And in a later slide, we'll share links to where you can do that, as well as phone numbers. Continue working with your state and local officials to declare your city, school, or health center a sanctuary. Educate your community about their rights and share available resources. So some of these resources are actually in the handout section of the control panel, and we'll also be sharing links at the end of the webinar as well. You can reach out to your lawmakers to let them know that you stand in solidarity with immigrants and refugees. You can join and host an action. And then lastly, we encourage folks to join SEARAC and NILC listservs to get up-to-date information and also to continue sharing your stories. If folks would like to plug into a national campaign to fight for immigrants and refugees, we encourage everyone to participate in the We Are All America National Day of Action being hosted by the Reform Immigration for America. This action is happening all across the country tomorrow, where advocates will be setting up in-district meetings with their members to express concern on the recent attacks on their communities. So the information's on the screen, but for more information, I do encourage folks to go to the Reform Immigration for America website for details. So before we close, as I promised, we wanted to share a couple of resources. First, a toolkit to defend against ICE raids and arrests, since we've seen that the raids that happened last week, might start becoming more of a regular occurrence given the current administration's deportation priorities. We also have a legal resource guide for Southeast Asian Americans facing criminal deportation. We also have our resources on Know Your Rights to protect immigrants against raids, and it's available in different languages, and we really encourage you to share this with your communities as well. There's also a link here for Know Your Rights information, especially for refugees. There's a link that we just actually added to the SEARAC website that lists pro bono attorneys who specialize in criminal deportation. So if you know of somebody that's impacted and needs legal representation, I encourage you to check out this page on our website. Jenny also mentioned earlier that NILC has an email dedicated to collecting stories and answering questions related to public benefits. It's a public charge at nilc.org. If you would like to report ICE activity in your community, the National Korean American Service and Education Consortium and United We Dream have set up rapid response hotlines that folks can call. A copy of this PowerPoint and webinar recording will also be made available on the SEARAC website for folks to use as well. Oh, and I also mentioned earlier that the sign-on letter that Jenny was mentioning in opposition to a possible public charge executive order, I'll be sure to send out the link to sign on for that in a follow-up email tomorrow to all of the participants. So with that, we'll take a pause. We have about 15 minutes to have some Q&A discussion with our speakers. So to let folks know, to make a comment or ask a question, you simply have to go into the control panel that you'll see on your webinar screen. It should be on the far left side. You'll see an orange arrow as the top icon. To let us know that you'd like to share a comment, please click on the raise hand icon, which you should see as the fourth icon down from the yellow arrow. We will unmute you and let you know when your line is open to comment. You can also click the raise hand icon to put yourself onto the list of speakers. And if you feel more comfortable typing in a question instead of verbalizing it, you can feel free to do so by typing that question in and into the control box and directing that question to the webinar organizers. So with that, we'll open up the line for some questions, but I wanted to tackle one specific question that was actually raised by one of our staffers here at SEARAC, which is actually a good question that we wanted to share clarification on. So Mari, our communications director, wanted to know, when you say the executive order on public benefits could influence Southeast Asian Americans regardless of immigration status, do you mean that U.S. citizens could be affected? So actually, Jenny, did you want to take that question first, and then maybe I could add on to it?
Sure. So the way it's written, I mean, the public charge determination, sponsor liability issues, those all are really targeted at people who, at legal documented immigrants who either have their green cards or lawful permanent residents or are applying for lawful permanent residency. But it would, I mean, some of the provisions directly impact kids, U.S. citizen kids in mixed status families, like the child tax credit provision is aimed at limiting access to the family for the economic supports access to the child tax credit for mixed status families. So that's targeting U.S. citizen kids, but who live in mixed status families with parents who file taxes with an I-10. Yeah, so it's kind of a mix. It potentially affects anybody. It also potentially affects people who have their green cards already around the deportation provisions of public charge, just emphasizing those a little bit more already. But clearly it's aimed at just stoking, it's part of the reign of terror on immigrants, and it's aimed at stoking fear in immigrant communities in general. I think this, even though we don't know exactly what the final guidance or regulations would be to implement this, the chill is being felt already just by any immigrant family who is concerned about how use of any of these kinds of benefits and use of this unknown list of benefits could affect their current immigration status, their future immigration status, their kids. So it's hard to say. Katrina, if you want to be more specific.
No, thank you, Jenny. That's actually very, very helpful. So, many Southeast Asian American community members have their legal. Oh, I'm sorry. Can folks mute themselves if they're not speaking? I'm hearing an echo. Okay, thank you. Many Southeast Asian Americans who came to the country as refugees have obtained legal permanent residency status, and some have gone on to naturalize. So as Jenny mentioned, this potential executive order really targets non-citizen individuals, including those that are green card holders. But as she mentioned, if you do not have status, for example, but your child is a U.S. citizen, this executive order would make it difficult for you to access certain benefits, and that could impact your children who are essentially U.S. citizens. So that's, I think, what is meant by saying that it impacts mixed status households.
Okay. Can I just add one thing, since you mentioned refugees, because the public refugees, asylees, and some other survivors of trafficking and domestic violence, people in certain other categories are a little bit more protected from this executive order because the public charge determination does not apply to them, as well as they don't need sponsors to apply for green cards, and so the sponsor liability pieces don't apply to them either. So, so that is one population that is less affected by this, and I think an important population to point out.
Thank you so much, Jenny. We want to go now to someone who's raised their hand in the queue, Tilak Nirula. We just unmuted you if you'd like to ask your question.
Hi, I'm Tilak Nirula from New Hampshire. I have one quick question. Can relatives who got teacher by Immigration Custom Enforcement attend child custody hearing?
Hey, Tilak, can you say that again? I think your phone was breaking up a little bit.
Tilak, could you say your question again? I think you cut out for a second, so we couldn't understand the question.
Okay. My question is, can relatives who got picked up by Immigration Custom Enforcement attend child custody hearing?
So is
Can relatives who were picked up by ICE
obtain child custody what?
Hearing.
Hearing? Can relatives who are picked up by ICE obtain a child custody hearing?
Yeah.
Angela, would you actually know the answer to that?
That is a technical question that we can direct to a lot of our lawyers here, but off the top of my head, I am unsure of the answer.
All right. We can get back to you, Tilak. We can find out that answer and get back to you. You can shoot me an email at katrina@searac.org, and we can get that information to you.
Sure,
so now, oh, you're welcome. Now we have another question from Duc Nguyen, who says, there are many people in the Vietnamese community in Orange County that are in deportation queue with criminal records. However, they are in fear of exposure. What local services and resources can they access? So SEARAC has worked very closely in the past with Asian Americans Advancing Justice. They have an office in Orange County as well as Los Angeles. We've worked previously with their attorney, Jacqueline Dan, who has handled specific cases and has reached out to SEARAC to help with advocacy on cases. Her information, as well as contact information for other legal service providers and advocacy organizations in the area, can be found on the SEARAC webpage that I was mentioning earlier. Another organization that SEARAC's worked closely with in Southern California is Khmer Girls in Action. They do a lot of organizing and community awareness as well. If folks are, oh, and Leanne Chin, their executive director, is actually on the call too. Oh, also, if anyone is in need of a community presentation in the LA or Orange County area, we were informed that Asian Americans Advancing Justice can follow up on these types of requests. And they shared with us a link where folks can include those types of requests, and I'll be sure to share that link with folks in my follow-up email to you all tomorrow after the webinar. If folks,
and then we'll give folks a few more minutes to type in their questions.
Yeah, so if folks, definitely don't be shy. Feel free to raise your hand in the queue or type in a question if you have any.
And Katrina, this is Angelo. I just wanted to ask what SEARAC plans to do, assuming there is a Muslim ban 2.0 executive order this week.
Thank you for that question, Angelo. I think our approach will be very similar to when the initial ban was issued, definitely coming out with a strong statement in opposition, coordinating and letting our community members know, basically dispersing information through their networks. In the past also, we've included talking points and encouraged folks to reach out to their members of Congress to oppose the travel ban. And also in the past, SEARAC has participated in a press conference with the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus to really show that Asian Americans are in opposition to any ban that excludes individuals, specifically just because they're Muslims. So really coordinating a strong communication strategy. And in addition as well, our communications team, headed by one, has been reaching out to a lot of community members as well to see if they would be willing to write opinion editorials that we would like to share in key publications to show that, Southeast Asian Americans who are refugees in the past also stand in solidarity with these new refugee communities. And, as we get more information on the new travel ban, we will be sure to share that information with folks to see where they can plug in. Any other questions? Oh, and in addition as well, this year we are hosting our Leadership and Advocacy training in the summer, followed by our inaugural Equity Summit in October. And we plan to use these spaces to strategize with the community to figure out next steps to make sure that, our lawmakers are hearing from us and that we are in opposition to these executive orders that target immigrants and refugees. And actually, we just sent out the invitation for leadership and advocacy training just last week. So if any folks on the call are interested in participating in that, we encourage you to look to our website and fill out the application. We also got a message from one of our board members, Sharon Stanley. She just wanted to share that there's a Know Your Rights as a Refugee in the USA, great resources that was produced by the Refugee Center online and the Church World Service. And I actually, Sharon, I think I included that link in the resource page, so I just wanted to again direct that, that to folks. We have another question. Andy Pacificar has his hand raised. Andy will unmute you right now.
All right, Andy.
Are you there, Andy? Andy?
Sorry.
No worries.
My phone on mute. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. I was actually trying to type in a couple of questions. My first question is, do you guys have any information on you guys feel that ICE would target formerly incarcerated people or people on the list during community events?
That's a great question, Andy. So we've been hearing a lot of different reports that ICE has been targeting certain areas where in the past they've tried to stay away from. We heard some reports last week, for example, like 2 individuals that were leaving a church were detained by ICE. So areas that in the past were deemed sanctuaries, or we always assumed that ICE wouldn't approach folks or try to detain them. Unfortunately, with this current regime, I would say that everything is basically on the table. I open it up to Angelo too if you've heard any reports of specific individuals that were targeted at community events. But I think what we're hearing right now from across the country is people are being targeted everywhere, near their churches. Someone was targeted when they were leaving a court hearing, and individuals have even had ICE officers knocking on their doors. So I don't know, Angelo, if you had anything else to add regarding that question?
Yeah, no. I just second what Katrina said, and that with the expansion of the enforcement priorities, it's sort of many have termed it just the expansion has just caused a lot of fear, and there's no specific community events that I've heard of that have been targeted, but I wouldn't put it past enforcement authorities to consider. Actually, scratch that. I think would agree with Katrina in that I think a lot of the locations being targeted are sort of unknown but open given the expansion of the priorities.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
go ahead, Andy.
Thank you. I was going to say thank you because that really impacts participation in the community for some of the people and leaders that we have. And so also what I did, if you guys know anything about, because of the targeting and the criminals, because people with past criminal convictions. So what about people that from Laos and Vietnam who don't have orders of deportation written but have criminal convictions? and like Laos doesn't accept people right now. And so what is the danger of these guys getting arrested at just regular check-ins or being at a community events or anything? Does that make sense?
Yeah, Andy, that definitely makes sense. You know, unfortunately, it's really difficult to say at this point. We're in the past.
Yes.
We had some comfort in knowing that, you know, we don't have a repatriation agreement that accepts refugees in Laos and Vietnam. You know, now under this current administration, under his recent executive order, he was very, very adamant and very vocal about punishing these countries. So it's really difficult to say at this moment, like, what's the likelihood of these individuals being issued deportation orders down the line. But all I can say is I encourage community members to just remain vigilant. You know, please keep up to date on what's been happening, and we'll be sure to share resources and news as we get it. But it's definitely a scary time.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, those are just like I guess questions everybody wants answers to.
Right, definitely.
My last question, if you don't mind, do you have one more?
Sure.
So right now, currently, there's like somewhere around 36 Cambodian people being detained pending travel documents being issued. And I was just wondering if you guys have any intel or any information on where these guys are being detained, how we could possibly support them or try to organize a community event, and if you guys have like any information on how that MOU negotiation is going at all, or if it is even going.
So the MOU negotiation strategy is actually being led by One Love. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten Cambodia. Yeah, we haven't gotten recent updates from them, but I had reached out recently to their board. So I'll keep folks posted on what I learn. Regarding your question about, sorry, what was the
guys that are currently detained?
Yeah. So those that are being issued travel documents, we've heard word that it's a mix of those that are currently detained, and there are individuals that are not detained that are being issued travel documents. And they're located throughout the country, and we believe that the biggest community that will be impacted is in Lowell, Massachusetts. There's also a big contingent out in Minnesota. And other folks, I've heard that I still need to verify, folks that are impacted in California, I believe Pennsylvania, as well as Virginia. With regards to follow-up actions or what you can do, we're actually working in coordination with a number of other Southeast Asian American organizations, including Mekong out in New York, Man Forward, as well as some members of CPEN, to try to figure out what a good national mobilization would look like. Unfortunately, those details are still being hashed out, but once it is hashed out, we'll make sure to share it with community members.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So I know we're a little over time, so I think we're gonna end it there. If folks have any follow-up questions, feel free to email me at katrina@searac.org. We really like to thank our speakers from NILC who really shared their expertise with us. Again, you know, please, we'll be informing folks if there are any updates on these executive orders. Our next community call will be on March 21st, and we will let folks know what the details on that are, as well as send out some registration information. So again, thanks everyone. We hope you found this call helpful. Please take the time to answer a quick survey that you'll be receiving at the close of this webinar. Have a nice day.